Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Across the world on the interwebs at michaeldukeshow.com and across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or translator. Hi, how are ya? It's Friday. It's not really Friday. I mean, I just, full disclosure, it's not really Friday, but it's Friday for me. Today is the last day of the week. I am taking I'm taking tomorrow off. It's official. It is the official holiday of me tomorrow, followed by the official Independence Day holiday on Monday. So for me, it's Friday. For you, it's probably Thursday, but that's okay. I just wanted to give you the fair warning and heads up that I will not be on the air tomorrow morning. You will have alternate programming in the interior and down on the peninsula, across the peninsula, and across the rest of the state. You will have alternate programming, and we'll be back together on Tuesday. Excuse me. And I will be rested and rejuvenated. And it pried that frog out of my throat. All right, so that's just, full disclosure and fair warning that's up. So that means tomorrow is off the air, so no Firearms Friday tomorrow, no Willy Waffle, which is unfortunate. But we are going to maybe cover a story or two today of firearms. But we've got a lot of other things happening. Including coming up in just a few moments, we are going to be joined by Donna Arduin, who is the former OMB director for the Office of Management and Budget. She's also an economist, and she now has had a bit of time to peel through the governor's budget and take a look at it, and she's going to give us a mostly full overview of what really, she's going to try and dissect it for us and cut through the talking points and cut through the press release and the headlines and give us, kind of the straight dope on everything that's happening with the budget this coming year. And are there really $400 million in cuts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that should be a fun. That should be a fun thing. I'm looking forward to seeing what's going on with that. She's going to be joining us here about 24 minutes after this morning to fully discuss. Then in hour 2, we will be joined for a brief period, or maybe not so brief a period. I don't know. I guess it depends on kind of how the conversation goes. I got a call and message this morning from Representative Ben Carpenter, who he's a little heated. He's a little heated, apparently, and I guess I want to make sure that I quote this properly so that I know, because this is the first time hearing about it. He wanted to know if we had a few minutes this morning where we could discuss it, and I did. He said the Kenai Grand Jury was disbanded yesterday when they tried to investigate alleged corruption within the Alaska judiciary. Judge Wells sent them home and told them they couldn't investigate. He said he wanted people to know that this is serious and it is being dealt with. The grand jury is the last bastion, by the way, of the citizens' judicial process. It really is the final step and the last shield wall against some kind of government tyranny. It's the one thing that allows investigations into basically and virtually anything. The fact that a judge who's part of the judiciary, who's invested in this whole thing and has a explicit conflict of interest, disbanded a grand jury, does raise some serious concerns. So we'll get some details on that from Ben Carpenter here in hour 2 this morning to discuss further. We'll be ready to go and diving into that here in just a little bit. Meanwhile, it's off to your headlines. Off to a few different headlines so you can see exactly what's going on. Well, it was announced yesterday that former President Donald Trump plans to attend a rally this next week for candidates that he has endorsed, including Sarah Palin and Kelly Tshibaka and Mike Dunleavy. A statement from his political action committee says the rally will take place July the 9th in Anchorage. Of course, Palin running for U.S. House, Tshibaka running for Senate, and Dunleavy running for governor. Trump late last year said Dunleavy had his endorsement, but that nod was subject to Dunleavy not endorsing Murkowski. And that was because Murkowski voted to convict Trump at his impeachment trial last year. And so it looks like it's the time. And I saw one of the headlines on Must Read said tickets are going fast. Get them now. Get them while they're hot. And feel free to go ahead and take mine. You go. You guys go. Enjoy. Have a good time. Like I've said it before, I'm not sure that's necessarily, I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing. I just don't really know. But I'll be hanging out with the fam for that. That'll be my thing here for that deal. And Chris in the chat room says, I wonder how those three feel sharing a stage in that context. That's the that's an interesting that's an interesting thought, putting all three of those, really powerful personalities on the stage. Well, 2 out of 3 anyway. Should be an interesting event. Let's put it that way. The Division of Elections has finally released a sample ballot for the for the August 16th primary, and it is, as we've feared so far, the front page of the ballot looks like that it will be listed for senator, representative, governor, and apparently the House seat or state Senate seat that they are going to be voting for. And that is all for the in the jungle primary form, meaning the only vote for one. Then you turn over the ballot and you'll have the special selection for the special general election for the U.S. House seat. And that's where you will be ranked choice voting on the various candidates. So they're doing it all on one sheet of paper. They're doing it all on one deal. And hopefully everybody is not confused and understand what's going on. And that's let the games begin. Let the games begin. This should be the fun time to figure out exactly what's going on out there. But they've got pictures, and the Must Read Alaska's got the story up. If you haven't taken a look at the story yet, you can go see some samples of what the ballots will look like. I was curious as to what the ranked choice portion of the ballot was going to look like, and this gives us a better idea of being able to fill in the blanks, 1 through 5 or whatever, 1 through 4, with a write-in. And we talked with Chris By yesterday. He's going to be a write-in, so many of us will probably be writing him into the general election as well. But there's a look at it. I've just posted a link up in the chat room if you want to go take a look at it. Or you can go over to Must Read Alaska. It's up near the top of it's up at the top of the page right there. This is what your August 16th ballot will look like, is the title of the story up there. And the final story that caught my attention this morning, because there's really not a whole lot of other things that are catching my attention, is that the Juneau School Board is still continuing to investigate the floor sealant served to children as milk. This has been going on for 2 weeks. The school board has scheduled a teleconference today to consider proposals for a third-party investigation in which 12 children and a couple adults were served chemicals that came in jugs that had a whitish appearance. They were served it as milk. The board said it's fully committed to investigating the events leading up to the children being served sealant. I would hope so. I hope they're fully committed to investigating, and hopes to ensure proper safeguards are in place to prevent such a mistake from happening again. Early indications point to the floor sealant being stored in a food storage warehouse along with the food. And they're in the middle of meeting all those things, but that investigation is still ongoing. I can't. So, I just don't even know. How do you do it? How do you do it? It's a weird thing. I guess we'll figure out exactly what exactly happened if we ever find out. And again, just reason number 612 why you probably shouldn't trust your children to the public school system. It was a summer care program, but it was put on by the school. So again, I just don't know why you would trust that to happen. All right. Obviously, I'm grumpy. And milk is good for you. It does a body good. Sealant, it does a body wood. It's a whole different thing. All right, we got more coming up. We got to get out of here. Donna Arduin is up next. We will continue with more. Don't go anywhere. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We'll return with Donna Arduin, our guest, right after this.
We're broadcasting live through a series of tubes.
Allowing all of these entities to provide streaming stuff going on the internet.
Well, it's kind of hard to explain. Sorry. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay. Vocal fry. Okay. Hey, how are you guys doing? Yeah. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Something about a new airline. And Stutz is getting a Challenger. Is she getting a Challenger? I don't usually go to the Kodiak Daily Mirror, but is that the story? Is Louise Stutz getting a Challenger? Did I miss that story? I'm looking here. I don't see it. Okay. Well, I'll have to get the scoop on that, Brian. I didn't hear that she was getting a Challenger. Okay. Good morning. Good morning, Dan. Give him hell, Ben, says Will. Says Bill. Bill Brock is back in Facebook jail for a week, he says. Let's see. Facebook jail is the place to be nowadays. Everybody's going to be in Facebook jail. Good morning. Kyle's in Facebook jail as well. Looks like all the cool kids are in Facebook jail. I'm not, because I'm not a rabble-rouser. Maybe I am. Glad they're protecting the environment by using one sheet for the ballot, said Brian. Cue Sheryl Crow. You mean they're actually getting someone who actually knows how to do an investigation? Yeah, exactly. Fred Astaire, I know, I had to laugh. Brian's like, holy cow, Fred Astaire is running for governor? All the candidates they used in the mock governor things are like Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, Spencer Tracy, Katharine Hepburn, Bogart, and Bacall. And, of course, Pierre and Marie Curie. They're libertarians. I had no idea that I had no idea that Madame Curie was a libertarian. Sent for some SpaceX gear, Falcon Heavy shirts. We need a link for this show's swag. I've been talking about the link for this show's swag for the last 3 days. It's at the top of the Facebook page. You can go right over there. All you got to do is click on my name at the top of the page, and there was a post right at the top that had the swag right there. The SCOTUS released another ruling. Per article, the Supreme Court dealt a significant blow to the Biden administration's climate change agenda, ruling Thursday that the EPA cannot pass sweeping regulations that could overhaul entire industries without additional congressional approval. Yes. That is 100% true. All right, let's get, I guess we'll call over to Donna and get her on the blower here, and we'll get things squared away. How about that? Good morning, Donna. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. You all ready to rock and roll?
I am.
Okay, we're getting a little bit of feedback again on your, I don't know if it's your speakerphone or if it's me, but.
Probably the speakerphone.
See, my voice is so powerful it kills your speakerphone. All right, hold the line. I'll be right back to you. Don't go anywhere, and we'll return in just a second. You can go back on speakerphone until we're ready. When I start talking to you, that's when we got to come back. All right, folks, do me a favor, like and share this video. If you haven't gone over to the YouTube channel yet, then go over there right now. Go to YouTube and search up my name, Michael Duke Show. And if you would subscribe and ring the bell, that would be fantastic. And they're off. Let's get going. Here we go. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Donna Arduin's our guest. Let's do this thing. Here we go. All right, continuing now, we're getting ready to dive into it. Donna Arduin is our guest, former OMB director and economist. She has had a chance to kind of go through the governor's budget, which was released Tuesday, and hopefully we'll get some straight dope on this because the bottom line is I was getting conflicting reports on what's really passed and what's not. And the governor used some kind of voodoo math in one of his presentations talking about how much money they're actually saving over the previous years. And, I mean, again, you have to be an economist almost to understand all the kind of voodoo stuff that's going on in there. So Donna Arduin has been gracious enough to come on board and talk with us about it. And she joins us right now. Good morning, Donna.
Morning, Michael.
So, we heard, I know that you and I have been talking that morning and the day after, that afternoon after the release and you had started counting. And I think the last, text or something that I had from you said, well, we're just about $100 million in cuts. And then the next morning, the headlines all read $400 million in cuts and $600 million saved and money put in savings. And can you demystify this a little bit for us here? What's going on here?
Sure. Well, I thought it actually might be helpful to recap what Brad has told you.
Sure.
What the legislative majorities did in the budget. We talked about this briefly last week, but a couple of things that they did were hide or stash money all over the place in their attempt to say, we're broke, we can't afford the PFD.
Right.
And so when we talked last week, I said my prediction for vetoes was the governor probably wouldn't veto a lot of real spending, but he might veto some of the shenanigans that they played to hide money.
Right.
As though I suppose they think you all aren't smart enough to understand what they were doing, and I'm sure you are. But so he vetoed some of that. He vetoed $360 million that was being put into the statutory budget reserve, the SBR. And that got confusing because people thought, well, that was 360 of the 400. It really wasn't, but there are some other things that were moving money around. An extra payment to the pension fund, he vetoed that. It was silliness, and I don't blame him for vetoing it, but it didn't really change much.
Right.
So the vetoes that vetoed real spending, I've gone through the spreadsheet that his Office of Management and Budget put out, and one more thing, by the way, one of the other places we talked about that they stashed money was that silly unconstitutional forward funding of education.
Right. So they put it in the K through 12 fund or something, or?
Well, yeah, basically it's just a fund within the general fund. It's like the SBR. I mean, it's all meaningless. It's just moving money from one account to another.
It's just a label. It's just a label. It's all the same money, essentially.
Yeah, and every appropriation dies on June 30th. So all of that money, whether it was SBR or education fund, it should all move into the CBR on June 30th.
And you say should, but you didn't sound 100% confident. So that means, is that mechanism still in effect? Is it going to move? It should move, or is there a possibility that somebody could hold on to it, or what?
Well, according to the Constitution, it needs to move.
Okay, I wanted clarification because you had a little bit of uncertainty in your voice, like it should go to the CBR.
Well, we talked about the audits in the past. I mean, the Walker administration ignored the Constitution and didn't move money into the CBR that it was supposed to. Right,
which later got caught, as we talked about, and eventually did get moved. So when it was all said and done and the dust cleared, Donna, and it was all, and things were all finished out, what was the final veto number when it was all said and done? And does it even matter that if I get an actual number, or were the vetoes sufficient? What's your thoughts?
Yeah. So one more piece of background that Brad has also reminded us of many times is that at the end of session, when the majorities were passing the budgets, they added $1 billion to the current year, the fiscal year 22 budget,
the supplemental,
which has 1 month remaining in it, and then they added about $1.2 billion on top of that to the FY23 budget. So if they had put all of that money in FY23, which in my opinion they should have, that would have been a $2.2 billion increase over the current year and over last year's budget. Out of that, I estimate, it's not a science, but I estimate that the governor vetoed about $150 million, to be fair. If you look at his spreadsheet, his Office of Management and Budget spreadsheet, and there's justifications, those things that say we prioritize savings over the spending
Right.
are really those things that are actual spending cuts.
So, and they did put some money into the CBR as well. I mean, that's part of this plan, right?
Well, we need to talk about that too.
Okay, wait. Well, I don't want to jump ahead of myself. So let's finish up on the cuts. $150 million in real cuts. So can you decipher for us, when you read in the paper that the governor cut $400 million out of the budget, and nobody really seems to be very upset about this. I mean, there was a few little hemming and hawing, but even most of them were like, oh, this was a hard-fought battle, and, we all did our part, and the governor's got to do his part. It sounded very kumbaya to me, which compared to the governor's, first budget is completely opposite. So can you describe what was the $400 million supposed to be? Where were the $150 million in cuts, and why aren't they more upset? Or is this just expected?
So there weren't a lot of real spending reductions. I think you might have said this yesterday when Senator Begich, not Nick, but the one in the Senate, said that it was a great budget. That should tell you a lot.
Right. Yeah. When Tom Begich goes, well, it was a hard fought battle, but it's okay. It's a good, but yeah, I was like, whoa, okay, wait a second.
So, well, there were some little things that were cut, some capital projects that hadn't begun yet, and but not a lot of there.
Right. Where was he? I'm sorry. Where was he coming up with this 400 million number that we've seen quoted in every newspaper so far?
Well, if you're transferring money from one fund to another, and then you veto the transfer, it's a veto. Legitimately, it's a veto, but I'm just talking about what's actual spending.
Okay, so again, just to break it down for those in the cheap seats, when we're talking about the vetoes, they can safely say he vetoed $400 million from the budget, to which most people would think, oh, okay, that's $400 million in spending that we're not. No. His actual spending, because he never gets into the dirt on that, his actual spending cuts in vetoes are 150, but he stopped another 250 from being transferred, and therefore we get kind of this, again, that kind of voodoo number crunching that they go, oh, we cut the budget. No, what you cut was the proposed increase to the budget, so we're still really going over. I mean, it's the same kind of thing, right?
Right, and so you still end up with a budget that's over $2 billion higher,
right,
than the last year's budget and the previous year.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So again, these are the kind of games that just drive me. This is the kind of gamesmanship that just drives me bananas. We should be a little bit more clear. I mean, for a second, can you go back over the philosophy? Kind of your all money is green philosophy. Because if we had a policy in place that was very similar to that, I think some of this kind of wishy-washy back and forth kind of semantical, circus that we run through would be less of a problem, because it's, moving from one to another and everything. But you're like, all the money is coming out of one account. It doesn't really what label you put on it. It's all the same money. Can you kind of, give us a quick thumbnail of your philosophy on that?
Yeah. So all of the money that goes into the state treasury should be prioritized. And your Constitution requires that. So it's not just good budgeting philosophy. It's also according to the Alaska Constitution. And over the past years, the legislature has stashed money into certain funds, into corporations, kind of all over the place. So it appears that it's off limits for spending, even though the legislature can spend it on anything they want. But in part, it's to protect their favorite programs, and in part, it's to keep the money out of Alaskans' hands, in my opinion.
Right, and obfuscate the whole thing, right? It makes it that much more. It makes it that much more complex, right? I mean, if the whole thing was it's all one big bucket of money and here's what we got to do, it really simplifies it. But the second that they start saying, oh no, it's this fund and it's that fund and it's this fund and it's this pocket of money and it's that pocket of money, and all of a sudden people are like, well, I can't track all that stuff down, and you're like, no, it all comes from the same bucket. It's all the same bucket, and I think that's intentional to try and, like you said, obviously, to me, obfuscate where all the money is coming from or going.
Oh, yes. And I watched one of the Senate finance hearings when the legislative finance staff were presenting to Bert Stedman.
Right.
And the obfuscation was just, I don't know if it was sad or laughable.
Yeah, because it was so obvious what they were trying to do, trying to hide what was going on to the money. And again, this is what infuriates people overall. It's totally infuriating. All right, well, let's. We got about 3 minutes here before we go to break. Is there anything else you want to cover before we jump into the whole savings thing, which you said, well, we've really got to talk about that, or are we going straight there?
I think we should talk about the savings.
Okay, let's hit it. Go ahead. The governor has said that he is putting 1.2 back into the constitutional budget reserve, 1.4, something like that. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So on the heels of the legislature having all of those meetings at the end of session to say there's no money, we're broke, we can't afford a PFD. Now suddenly there's money for savings. And if I was watching it, the governor's press briefing, his OMB director came up to the microphone and said, well, we put out a new revenue forecast in June. And so then I think, so there's the Department of Revenue traditionally does a fall forecast and then a spring forecast.
Right.
As you might recall,
right.
The legislature was waiting for the spring forecast because it was going to be likely, say that oil prices were going to be higher than they had forecast in the fall. Now remember, this is for the fiscal year that begins July 1. So the forecast has to hold up for the next 13 months. And I think you talked about this yesterday. So what the governor said is, if oil prices remain high, we'll put money into savings. Right. But if they don't, rather than taking money out of spending, we're just not going to put money in savings.
Right. So we'll spend it. So instead of saving it, we'll just spend it, is essentially what they're saying.
That's right.
Which, man, the priorities have shifted so mightily in this administration since your departure. I mean, this is really. I mean, I saw what you tried to do, Donna. You tried to bring bring change to an organization that was so dysfunctional in the way that it did things and the way that they accounted for money and everything else. And they basically undone any bit of work that you did in your tenure there at all. We're back to the business as usual, but now that we got even more money, we're stacking it higher and deeper. Am I wrong?
Yes, and just, remind everyone, which you don't need to be reminded of, you didn't get your full PFD.
Right, but we're going to put $1.4 billion in savings, supposedly. But you didn't get your full PFD because I guess we just couldn't afford it. That's an unaffordable PFD. That's what they're saying.
That's right.
Right.
The other thing that they say, and you've heard this, which is accurate, is that a lot of that spending is in capital projects, which everyone says, which are one time, but they're not. There's a maintenance tail.
Right.
And as you've said many times, there should never be something called deferred maintenance because it should be built into the cost of the program. And as Brad likes to talk about the 10-year plan, it should be built in the 10-year plan, all the cost of maintaining all of that in capital.
Right. Well, there should be a fiscal note and a rider on every bill that says what is the ongoing cost of this bill or program going out for the next 10 years. You should be able to see that. That should be part of the conversation because it's always great to say, well, we want to build X, some building or facility or something like that, because it'll be great for the community and yada, yada. And we got some federal monies and we get, this and that and the other thing. Great. What's the long-term cost? They never talk about what the long-term cost is going to be.
The other thing I say about capital is when it also has in the past been the reason, all that capital spending, the reason that Alaska's in this predicament to begin with. Remember that during the years when oil prices were high in Alaska, they started spending a bunch of money. Well, it's only on capital. It's one time. And then when oil prices fell, they kept going. And as you know, spent most of $17 billion in savings.
Right.
And continuing that kind of spend. So it's only capital sort of rings hard in my ears when I think about Alaska.
Well.
And then they put, so then when we arrived, there was $2 billion left in the CBR, which is, a bare minimum needed for cash flow for the state. And now, the governor's saying, well, we're going to get it up to $3 billion, maybe if we decide to do it. There's some definite irony in that situation right there, turning it 100% around. And of course, what I found most ironic about all this was the same group of people who could not control the spending and spent $16-17 billion out of savings, and could not even be bothered to try and really do any substantive cuts. At the same time, were the ones that were crying this time around, it's not fiscally responsible to pay a dividend because we're out of money now. They never had a problem spending money they didn't have because they always had the CBR to fall back on and everything else. But now they've become fiscally responsible. Yeah, and I don't know how anyone could call a budget fiscally responsible that's A, that large, and B, spent part of your dividend.
Yeah, exactly. Donna Arduin is our guest, former OMB director and economist. We're going to continue our discussions with her this morning. We might branch out a little bit here into the coming fiscal and what we should be looking for. And maybe I'd like to get her take a little bit more on some of the supplemental stuff as well. It is the Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We're going to be back with more, and Donna Arduin, our guest. We'll continue in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
Our light, our guide, and our trusted friend. Michael Duke Show.
Donna Arduin's our guest here on the program, and we're going to continue here in just a moment. I want to, when we come back, I want to get into what they've been doing with monies and the fund and what the plan is ultimately with the permanent fund itself. I want to talk a bit with Donna about that, but let's go back to the to this fundamental difference in how some politicians see what's going on with the fund, and again this obfuscation of all the different buckets. Donna, you're a student of this, obviously. Is this unique to Alaska with like the general fund and the non-dedication? But they can designate, and all this kind of stuff. Is this a uniquely Alaska problem, or is this something that happens across the country?
It does happen across the country, but unique to Alaska is having a constitution that prohibits it,
right,
which I think is a good thing. In other states, we've had to undo the trust funds and pour them back into the general fund, or simply prioritize them as spending in the general fund. I mean, some
right.
states are really crazy. And when Michigan, my home state, the first governor I worked for, the only trust fund was the education, the school aid fund. And then I got to Florida and there were hundreds of trust funds. I said to Governor Bush, the only thing you don't have a trust fund for is education. I mean, it makes no sense.
Right.
And it's just, legislators trying to bind future legislatures by setting up a fund for their favorite projects.
Right, and not just that. Again, the second effect of that is to obfuscate and increase the complexity of the system itself, so that I think the average citizen is in the dark. I mean, unless you get a spreadsheet and a slide ruler and you figure out and you pull out all the statute books and everything else, the average person is going to have a hell of a hard time trying to figure out where all the monies are going, what the actual balance sheet looks like, and everything else. I mean, I think that's partially intentional as well, that it's almost like hiding in plain sight.
That's right. When Ed King worked for us, economist Ed King put together a picture, a graph with all the different colors of money going in, and then where they go back out, it looked like a spider web.
And nobody knew. I mean, he had to track all that stuff down and graph it out, because otherwise people just don't know where the money's going and what's going on. I mean, you and I talked here, I don't know, a while ago when we started talking about cash on hand and some of the other things, and you started talking about things like some of the corporations and their assets. Last time we talked, you talked about not being able to see the balance sheets for some of these corporations. So we've got, I mean, would you say that we've got hundreds of millions or maybe even billions in the bank that the general public is really not aware of, and maybe even some of the legislature and administration is just in the dark on? We don't really have a good picture of the entire fiscal snapshot of the state?
I would say that. We'll remind you, though, that's one of the reasons we talked about the Consolidated Annual Financial Report, or the CAFR,
Right.
because it does show the balance sheets of the corporations. What it doesn't show is their revenues and expenditures, their profit and loss statements.
Right. So it doesn't show the ins and outs and everything else of where the money came from and where the money went. That is. I mean, it's just astonishing to me that these are the games that we continue to play, and you've got some of the people in there who I think are intentionally playing them to try and keep is it the reins of control? Is it the control of the money, the power? I mean, in your opinion, as you've seen this in this state and in other states, is the lure here just having your hand on the purse string and being the person that is able to dole out the shekels?
Right. And the structure in many states is that there's a centrally coordinated, not only we talked about accounting, but also the budgeting process. And in Alaska, the folks who run the corporations really are kind of running their own government. And even the agencies, to the extent that they can move money around. We talked about this last week.
Right.
So it's a very decentralized approach, and the legislature can change that, but I imagine some of those who set the system up in the first place, like it that way because the things they want to have funded are getting funded, and it's not transparent to the public where all the money's going.
As you've gone through these different states and tried to help them with their fiscal problems and fiscal messes, is that one of the first solutions that you look for, is a centralizing of the control and the gatekeeping on that? Or, I mean, can decentralization work, or should it just all be pulled back together?
Well, many states, it is pulled together. And I think it's a good thing from a perspective of the governor, the chief executive officer of the state, the corporation. Right. If I always say, if I was your chief financial officer and this is a corporation, we wouldn't be doing anything this way.
Right, exactly. All right, hold on. Let's get back to it. Donna Arduin's our guest. All right, welcome back to the program. Common Sense Radio, the Michael Duke Show. Donna Arduin is our guest, economist and former OMB director for the state of Alaska. We so many things that I want to talk about, and the problem with talking with Donna is that she's got so much information. I'm trying to formulate questions half the time, and listen to what she's saying at the same time. It's pretty crazy stuff. But we were just talking about in fact, we talked about it last week. This decentralization of the spending and everything else, and we were talking during the break about. This could be fixed. And Donna, you were saying that in many other states, this is what's happened, is that they have more centralized the power in the governor's office, in the administration, and done away with some of this spider web effect of all the money's going out and really nobody knowing and being able to account for it in a comprehensive fashion. Would that be your suggestion here in the state? And would it require the cooperation of the legislature? The governor can't do it on his own, I'm assuming. That would require the cooperation of the legislature to fix?
Well, either of them can do it. The legislature can say, hey, we want more controls over the expenditures, both from the agencies or in particular from the corporations. And they're called corporations, but they're state government.
Right.
But they all also work for the governor. So a governor could say, look, we're not going to do business this way anymore.
Right. And take control of that and take some of that control away from some of the different independent agencies and corporations. The governor as an administrator has some power to do that, but it would require some intestinal fortitude, I guess, to be able, because you would be, I imagine you would be weathering some slings and arrows of people who are like, this is how we've always done it and this is how we always need to do it.
That's right. And I think I told you a story last week about Bruce Tangeman and I sitting down with one of the corporations and trying to get them to open their books to us.
Right.
As well as the university system.
Right. And they just literally flat out refused, even though you, I'm assuming, had the statutory authority to ask and to look at those things.
Well, the OMB arguably does.
Mm-hmm.
I did also mention last week that they are exempt from the administrative code, so Kelly Shabaka couldn't just go in and audit them. Right.
But the OMB should have been able to as well.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk here. We got about 6 minutes, but I want to talk real quick about this because I've been thinking more and more about this and seeing this more and more. We have been rolling, and Michael Sheldon makes the point in the chat room that Stedman specifically and some of the others have been rolling billions of dollars over the last few years into the corpus of the fund. Now, Sheldon makes a point that that's part of our PFD and the rest of the money is in different funds, et cetera, et cetera. But here's what I've been thinking about and seeing. That every time that they say, we're protecting this money, we're rolling it into the corpus, my initial reaction was, well, good, at least it's out of your hands. But later on, I realized the attempt here is basically to bolster and grow the fund to the point to where they can just live on the draw and don't ever have to talk to anybody else about any other kind of money. They're looking to make government self-sustaining, and I don't mean that in a good, sustainable way. I mean, they want to grow that to the point to where they have access to all the money they want. If they had $100 billion permanent fund and could draw that $5 or $6 billion every year with no questions asked, they could basically do whatever they wanted at that point. Am I wrong in that, or am I seeing something that's really there?
Well, I think it's obvious, and I think you've had legislators come on the show and say exactly that that's what their colleagues have told them their goal is. I would suggest from an economic standpoint that could only work if, and this could be a real scenario, that you take so much money out of what you have of a private sector in Alaska that it diminishes even more dramatically. And if that's the case, then people will leave the state. And the only way for the permanent fund to sustain a government with no private sector is if you don't have many people left.
Right. So they have their own little fiefdom where everybody, it's literally the ultimate self-licking ice cream cone where the private sector has diminished and shrunk. The government sector continues to grow and continues to feed on itself because it has access to this huge pot of money, and it is isolated in that effect from the effects of the economy for what they do. They don't really care what happens to the private economy because they know they've got that big pot of money just pumping, generating stuff out to them year after year, and they're okay with that. So maybe that's why it shows that there's such ambivalence to the effect of PFD takings and everything else on the private economy.
And your next guest, Representative Ben Carpenter, has spoken about that on your show and his significant and justifiable concerns about that goal and what it'll do to what's left of your economy.
I mean, if you were coming into a state and advising a governor, as you've done in many different states across the country, but as if you saw this attempt, what would your counsel be to that governor? I mean, if you saw this going on, what would, give me your talk to what you would say to that governor as you looked at this as a problem, something that could be used in a different way, or give me your speech on that.
That one of your organizing principles as a governor needs to be, how do we grow the private sector? And everyone who works for you needs to have that as one of their primary goals.
Right.
So, you have the deregulation, but you also have to have less dependence on government. And I don't just mean, you've talked about this, Michael, but not just welfare, but the corporate dependence on government.
Right, corporate cronyism.
Until you cut those strings and shrink the size of the state government, you're not going to be able to grow the private sector. So that's why I differ with folks who say we should have a tax in order for people to have skin in the game. If your state government was the size of Florida's, which is, a quarter, Florida spends a quarter per capita the spending that Alaska has. Yes, I know there's some geographical issues, but then I would say, yeah, now you can talk about putting a sales tax in place. That's how Florida funds itself, for example. But it's a very small government, and there's very little dependency on government.
Donna Arduin is our guest, former OMB director and economist. I appreciate you coming in, Donna. Overall, quickly here, the governor's, this is not a surprise what happened with the governor, what his proposals were. So this is pretty much in line with what you expected, right? 30 seconds here.
It is, because of his past performance.
Yeah. And not surprising, not encouraging either, I think, in the long run. But a good job, predicting this and giving us some analysis of it. Donna Arduin, we appreciate that. Hold the line real quick. Folks, out of time. Ben Carpenter is going to be joining us in hour 2. We may have a couple firearms headlines as well. The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio. Ben Carpenter up next. Oh, man. I think James nailed it almost exactly here. He says, it's almost as if they try as hard as they can to go against the spirit and intent of the Constitution. Dedicated funds other than a permanent fund are prohibited, yet each one of these has a piggy bank, which are not being constitutionally swept to repay the debt owed to the CBR. They become, in effect, dedicated fund, untouchable kingdoms of political power. And that's what we were talking about earlier in this segment, Donna. I mean, that's really... Here we have the Constitution that is pretty damn clear, and there'd be like, oh, wink, wink, these are designated, not dedicated. It's not the same thing at all. And I just, and even the courts deciding this, this kind of farcical stuff has got to stop.
It does. Or you're going to, we talk about this and you talk about this, but Alaska is going to continue to deteriorate its private sector. And again, as some of your legislative guests have said, maybe that's the goal.
Well, yeah, maybe it is. Maybe it is to depopulate the private sector, to make the private sector dependent on the public sector, instead of the other way around, and basically create this own, again, that what I said earlier, this self-licking ice cream cone of government being able to fund itself outside, because we don't have a traditional tax structure in the state. We don't have people up in arms over the expenditures of government, and they don't have to be beholden to anybody, including their constituency, because they got this pot of money, this golden goose that just keeps laying the eggs for them to spend. Nothing's going to change unless we get the right people in there, right?
And can I remind us of one of the
Sure.
prime examples? So the PCE, the Power Cost Equalization Fund,
Right.
that falls into the category of, we created a fund, a semi-dedicated fund, got around the Constitution. Well, it's worse than that, because it also creates energy dependence on state government. And one of the organizing principles of having a thriving economy in Alaska needs to be energy independence. But so those funds not only are, in my mind, unconstitutional and non-transparent, but they also cause dependency on government.
Right. Which, again, I think is part and parcel of the plan. I mean, that's part and parcel of the plan, to create that dependency on government so that they can then have more control on this. We've got to pull back on, and the PCE is the prime example. I mean, talk about, giving a man a fish versus teaching a man to fish. The PCE, it was intended in the original language to build out that infrastructure to make it out. Instead, it's become a handout program where you give them a fish and make them more dependent on you instead of allowing them to be self-reliant.
That's right. And I think Senator Schauer was talking yesterday about how can we bring about energy independence in the state of Alaska.
Yeah, well, and it's an important question. I mean, the only way that societies grow and economies progress is, one of the cornerstones of that is cheap, affordable energy. That's the only way, because that's manufacturing, that's everything. It's a cornerstone, and if we can't get it, then it stymies it. And we see all this resistance to any other kind of idea. We see resistance to using the PCE to actually create or generate infrastructure that would help with that. Instead, they want to use it as just payouts and handouts and supplements and things like that, which is, that's not even the intent. When you look back, that's not even what the intent of the bill was to begin with, right?
Yes, and I should also mention Willie Keppel, because Willie comes on your show and lays this all out for us, and I really hope that he gets elected to office in Alaska and help turn some of those things around.
Oh, I agree. We need somebody who definitely sees some of this stuff and where they're burying the bodies and hiding the skeletons, et cetera, on this, and how detrimental it can be to the rural communities as well. Well, Donna, as always, it's a joy to speak with you. Like I said, I should really just sit down for an hour and write out a bunch of questions, and then I'll throw them out, because you'll always bring something up that I wasn't aware of before. And I'm still blown away by the fact that these corporations do not have to open their books to you in the terms of profit and loss and where the cash flow is going. That to me is just so mind-boggling. I'm still reeling from that. But it's always good to hear from you, and I'll give you a chance for any final thoughts you may want to leave with the listeners this morning.
Well, I was listening to you at the beginning of the show, and you mentioned that President Trump is coming for a rally in Alaska, which is exciting. I imagine that his folks who invited Dunleavy don't know about his record, or has he endorsed Kelly Tshibaka? Because it just seems very strange to me.
Well, that was the weirdest. That was the weirdest stipulation everywhere. You just can't endorse Murkowski. That means I can't endorse Murkowski, but I can endorse anybody else, or I can't endorse any. It's all so confusing. I said it before. I don't know that if I was a candidate, if I would want, or if I would be happy or sad that I got endorsed by Trump at this point, just because it has so many different connotations. I'm just not even sure if I would want to have to try and suss out that headache. But yeah, interesting that was the sticking point with the governor, not to endorse Murkowski. But I guess it didn't mean that he hadn't endorsed anybody else, I guess.
Well, anyway, it should be fun.
All right. Well, Donna Arduin, thank you so much for calling in this morning. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Michael.
Donna Arduin, our guest here on the Michael Duke Show this morning. Good stuff from her. All right, folks, we're getting ready. Ben Carpenter should be calling in here in just a hot second, and we'll be talking with him and getting him all squared away for hour two. Grand juries is going to be our discussion talking point. I haven't talked about grand juries in a while. There's a whole lot of stuff going on there. We're gonna get some rundown on that. All right, we're going to be back. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio.
Buddy, put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the interwebs and across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station. It is the Michael Duke Show. Hi, how are you? Welcome to it. It's Friday. No, it's Thursday, but for me, it's Friday. That's right. 4-day weekend coming up for me. The 4th of July, Independence Day on Monday. And I decided for my own mental health to take tomorrow off. So today is the final day of broadcast for the week. You'll have alternate programming on the stations tomorrow and on Monday. And then we will be back on the air on Tuesday for you to hang out with and enjoy and talk about. So that'll be coming up. Next week. I'm looking forward to it, and I hope you are as well. Meanwhile, today we've got one final hour of the show that we're going to be diving into and talking about some of the issues. I'm hoping to get to some firearms talk here later in the show. But, you know, it just depends. We're going to see where the flow takes us. This morning I got an early text message from Representative Ben Carpenter asking if he could come on talking about grand juries. Now, I've had several conversations over the last 10 years about grand juries. I think that they are, as I said earlier, a cornerstone of the American, the legal system. They are the final check on many things, including specifically grand juries can look into government malfeasance in a way that, really kind of short circuits the system, because it's tough when you've got government controlled courts trying to investigate government entities. There's a lot of conflict of interest in there, and that's really the purpose of the grand juries. So anyway, Ben sent me a message this morning and said they disbanded the Kenai Grand Jury, and we wanted to get some details on that and wanted to talk with him about that because he is hot on that trail. So we're joined right now by Ben Carpenter, GOP state rep from District 30 down in the peninsula. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning, Michael. You can hear me good.
I can hear you good. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we're doing good.
Do I sound beautiful? That's my question. Do I sound beautiful? All right. Just say no, because I'm obviously not.
All God's creatures are beautiful.
All
Michael.
God's. Wow, that was a mom answer right there. Mom, am I beautiful? All God's creatures are beautiful. All right, Ben. Well, I got to say, I did catch wind of something. I got an email yesterday or day before from somebody on the Kenai about grand juries, and I was going to look into it because I hadn't really been paying attention, but I have covered grand juries in the past. I believe that they're a very, very important tool for people and citizens to be able to protect their freedoms specifically against government. And you sent me this message this morning, and I felt like it was serendipitous. So give us the rundown exactly what is going on down in the Kenai. Obviously, you're better informed on this than I am. So tell us what's happening down there.
Yeah, thanks, Michael, for the opportunity. And I wanted to come on and just bring everybody up to speed before things get out in the news media, and who knows where it goes from there. There are some things that I can talk about and some things I probably shouldn't talk about. I just want to kind of bring everybody up to speed here. So the grand jury is a very serious thing. It's fundamental to our type of government. And if you look at our state constitution, you have Article 1, that's a declaration of rights. And the first one is our inherent rights: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, that type. Source of government, civil rights, that's the third section. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, that we have due process. And then there's grand jury. And the grand jury, the last sentence in that section says the power of grand juries to investigate and make recommendations concerning the public welfare or safety shall never be suspended.
Right.
And what happened in Kenai yesterday was a suspension of the grand jury. Judge Wells, upon hearing that the grand jury voted and agreed, majority members, to go a direction and investigate a subject concerning the public welfare, that she told them to go home and your services are no longer required. And this is a grave misjustice. It flies in the face of our Constitution. And it is in violation, I believe, of statutes and potentially criminal statutes. I'm not an attorney,
right?
But we need some good legal folks to start taking a look at this. I had a conversation with the Attorney General, and he is aware of what happened. I have actually been working with the Attorney General and his staff for weeks now on the grand jury issue that we have, which is we have two different types of authority for the grand jury. What I will call AS 124070 authority, which is the normal way that a grand jury proceeds. The prosecuting attorney brings an indictment, and the grand jury decides whether they're going to further that indictment. And if they do, they give it to the judge. If they decide no, then the case doesn't go forward. That's the normal flow of how our legal system works right now.
Right.
There's also 124040 authority, which is, and that's AS 12.40.040, that grand jury members, if they have knowledge of a crime, may investigate and may issue an indictment regardless of whether the prosecutor was aware of the crime or not. And then the prosecutor is obligated to push that indictment forward.
Right. Kind of a self-direction kind of thing. Like, we don't need the government's permission to investigate this crime and to push it forward for prosecution.
So what has happened yesterday is that 124040 authority was suspended. The grand jury voted. My understanding, I wasn't there, this is what I'm hearing from secondhand from one of the grand jurors themselves, through another person. But what happened was the grand jury took a vote. One of the members presented some information and said, hey, do you want to investigate? The majority of the grand jury said, yes, we want to investigate. When they decided to call a witness, the judge stepped in and closed them down. And that is wrong.
Well,
in so many words.
Well, it sounds like to me like it's a direct violation of the constitutional provision for grand juries. I mean, if it's shall not be suspended is pretty clear language. And from my understanding in the email that I got yesterday about this, is that it was in part had to do with an investigation into components of the judiciary itself. My question is, how can the judge even rule on that without a conflict of interest and everything? And again, let alone the constitutional aspects of it. I mean, if this is an investigation into the judiciary that's being squashed by the judiciary itself, I mean, that's some real issues going on there.
Yeah. So it's interesting. The statute specifically says that the grand jury has access to is entitled to access at all reasonable times to the public jails and prisons, to offices pertaining to the courts of justice in the state, and to all other public offices, and to the examination of all public records in the state. The juries, the grand juries, one of the grand jury's main purposes is to look after the public welfare of its government,
right?
To make sure that its government is doing what it's supposed to be doing,
right?
And in this case, it is my understanding, although I wasn't there with the grand jury, there's only a limited number of people who are actually allowed to be in there when they're talking and discussing things. My understanding is that there is a claim of corruption within the judiciary that has now been squashed by a sitting judge, that the grand jury is not allowed to investigate. And that is, it flies in the face of the Constitution. It flies in the face of the statutory authority of the grand jury. And if it is indeed a judge acting on behalf of somebody who is going to be investigated by the grand jury, then I think there's a legal case for a criminal negligence here on the judge's part.
Yeah, well, and again, just on the face of it, it would seem so. Simply because that, as I was saying earlier, and as you just alluded to, the grand jury is the final shield and bulwark of the people against the government. I mean, it's very it's clearly spelled out, things that are in the people's interest and the people's welfare against the government. The grand juries have been used across the country to root out things like government corruption and everything else. Because, the machine, when the machine is eating you, nobody wants to stop the machine. You can't go to the governmental courts and try and get it to stop. That's the power of the grand jury. The people in those areas decide whether or not to send those things forward. And that's the important function of the grand jury. It literally is the last line of defense for many people. So Ben, what's happening now? I mean, like you said, when the news media gets a hold of this, if they even decide to report on it, you sounded like you may be a little worried that there'll be some spin or something on it. Where is this going now?
Well, reported corruption or suspected corruption or having problems with holding our judges accountable in the state of Alaska is nothing new, right? This is something that's been kind of sticking in people's craw for many, many, many years.
Right.
And we have been a number of us have been working behind the scenes to kind of move the grand jury process forward so that investigatory grand juries, it has been the case of the prosecuting attorneys have decided that what the grand jury can and can't investigate. And so I think the public, when they find out the totality of what's been going on here for the last few weeks, will be proud of those who are involved, because we've been very patient. We've been doing our due diligence and making the system work for itself and have justice through peaceful means. We aren't an angry mob yet. we do have due process here, and we do have a government that needs to uphold the law and uphold the Constitution. So we're working forward with that. I don't know, and there are others that are not exactly sure what you do when you have a conflict between the three branches of government in this sense. So is there an arrest that needs to be made, or is there an impeachment that needs to happen, or does this go to some sort of a arbitration or whatever? So we're looking through that in the next couple of days here to figure out what the right course of action is. But it is very clear that our statute has been violated and our Constitution has been violated with the actions of this judge.
Right.
And it isn't just one judge. We know that there are other judges in the past with similar issues where the grand jury has requested, or somebody has requested, a member of the grand jury has requested to conduct an investigation, and the judiciary, a judge has said, no, you're not going to do this, or a prosecuting attorney has said, no, you're not going to do this. So it is evidence of a systemic problem that we are trying to both correct misjudgments within the people and potentially processes that need to be put in place to enable full execution of the law.
And it is such an unusual situation. I could see not having a way to really, not understanding what the process is to move forward on this. But to me, in just a plain reading of what you what you read about the Constitution, what the Constitution says, what this judge did, it would seem to me that there needs to be some kind of recusing or something of the case from this judge if that is the case. So is the Attorney General giving you any direction yet? Is the state, what's going on with this? I mean, as far as that goes, can you say, or?
I can't say right now, and that's not to obfuscate. Literally, this incident happened near the close of business yesterday, and the conversations I had have been over late last night. So we have today's business day to dive into this and figure out what's going to happen. And that's not to offer an excuse or delay.
Right.
It's just happened.
Right. It's just simple mechanics of we got to get it done. I'm seriously concerned. The judiciary is supposed to be a co-equal balancing branch of government. And if there is, as they're saying, if there is suspicion of some kind of, problem, collusion, corruption, whatever, then it needs to be rooted out for sure. And the grand jury being stymied in this, to me, that's a direct attack on the freedoms and the protections that are baked into the Constitution against government at this point.
Totally agree, Michael. We've got a situation here where two statutes. You've got, people can look this up too. They go to the akleg.gov website and punch in statutes. AS 12.40.030 is the duty of inquiry into crimes and general powers. And it says that the grand jury shall inquire into all crimes committed or triable within the jurisdiction of the court and present them to the court. The grand jury shall have the power to investigate and to make recommendations concerning the public welfare or safety. And that has specifically been denied the grand jury by one judge.
Right.
The following statute is the AS 124040 authority. That says if an individual grand juror knows or has reason to believe that a crime has been committed, that it is triable by the court, the juror shall disclose it to the other jurors who shall investigate it. This is statutory authority that is being denied the grand jury.
Well, yeah, and
in this case,
and the verbiage that basically says in the Constitution that it shall not be suspended. The power of that grand jury shall not be suspended, and yet this judge says, nope, you're done, go home. Well, I don't know what your definition of suspended looks like, but that looks pretty close to mine.
Maybe there's a legal term that has a nuance there. I don't know.
Right.
It's not that they won't call another grand jury, but that's not the point. I mean, that's another grand jury gets called and it only investigates the things that the judge says they can. That's not the spirit of the law.
Right. No, that's not the spirit of the statute or of the Constitution itself or the history of the grand juries in and of themselves. I mean, that flies right in the face of what the grand juries were created for, because the framers were concerned about the judiciary, not having oversight in that in that co-equal branch of government, as it were. Ben, do you got a second to hold on with us here?
Sure.
All right, hold the line for just a second. We're going to continue in just a moment. Representative Ben Carpenter will get some final thoughts on this issue, and then maybe we'll get Ben's take on what came out of the budget as well. Since we have him on the phone, we might as well. We'll continue the Michael Dukes Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We'll be back with more and Representative Ben Carpenter right after this. All right, Ben Carpenter's our guest. So, Ben, it's just me, you, and 49 of our closest friends on Facebook and YouTube. I'm shocked. I mean, when I saw this, I was like, well, that just didn't seem right. When I saw the email late yesterday, I was like, that just doesn't seem – I got to go look more into this. And then you sent me that message this morning, and I'm like, well, okay, maybe there's something to this. I mean, this is – I mean, would you blame me for reading an email like that and thinking, oh, somebody's just overreacting? Because there's no way that would happen here, that we would violate the Constitution or basically, sideline a grand jury over something like that. I mean, shocking, I guess, is not too strong a word for it.
Yeah. So if we play devil's advocate for a second here and say, hey, you know what? The bureaucrats, judges, staff, clerks, and all that have got a lot of things on their plate, right? There's a lot of cases to process through. We really don't want crackpots coming before the grand jury. And frankly, everybody who gets convicted is going to think they're wrongly convicted. I mean, that's no surprise. I want to speak to a grand jury because I was screwed. And I totally get that. But we don't have a process, the courts don't have a process to deal with, to separate out those cases where the grand jury has a legitimate concern and those where the grand jury might be like, you know what, quit wasting our time. This is not an issue. We haven't gotten to that point yet. The grand jury, this is the furthest that the grand jury has gotten, where the grand jury says, yes, I want to investigate. Prior, either the prosecuting attorney or the judge has said, no, you won't investigate. You're not allowed to. So now we're finally at the point where the grand jury says, we've seen enough of the evidence that we want to investigate. And now the judge says, no, you can't. It is a constitutional crisis right now. Who enforces this? Which does one branch enforce the other branch to follow the Constitution?
Right.
Like this is a true constitutional crisis for us right now in regards to the grand jury problem.
Right, and I don't know what level Judge Wells is, if she's a local judge, superior circuit, whatever. But I mean, even my fear is that even say, for example, the attorney general gets involved, then it has to go to a higher and higher court. And if we're talking about investigating judicial corruption or something like that, I mean, like you said, it's a constitutional crisis, but it also is a crisis in the faith in government. If they are unwilling to have an investigation into their own division, into their own branch of government, that leaves that's a whole other bunch of questions there at that point, if they're not willing to do that.
Yeah, how deep does this rabbit hole go?
Exactly. I mean, because if the attorney general has to bring it and say we need to go over this judge's head and go over here, or we need to put this question to a superior court or to the Supreme Court, and if none of them want to have it investigated, that now you've got a danger of endangering the faith of people in government in general at that point. I mean, that's not a good thing at all.
Yeah. So the Department of Law, which is underneath the Attorney General, has a public corruption division or section within it that they specialize in public corruption. I don't know this for a fact, but I suspect that they will probably become involved at some point here. And this is, a novice speaking here, right? I've never dealt with this type of issue before. And you wanted to talk about money issues, budget issues. And, every time I come on, we talk about budget issues. And here I've got an opportunity to talk about something that's not money related. But the point is that I'm trying to get to is there's a process, there's a way to deal with this. We're just in the infancy of trying to figure that out.
Right.
Does it go through the executive branch and an indictment get put down to another grand jury to investigate and a judge held accountable? Or does the troopers go in and say, hey, we have evidence? I don't know. If none of that happens, then the alternative would be an impeachment charges brought against the judge from the Senate. And if that doesn't happen, if that outcome is not what needs to happen, then the people have the ability to not retain that judge when they come up for the retention election. So those are the processes that we have in place that we just need to figure out which one we're going to follow.
Ben Carpenter, our guest. We're about to jump back into it. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Like and share the show. Like and follow the video. Let's get going on here. Ben Carpenter is our guest today. We're continuing on in this second segment here, GOP State Rep for District 30. So I guess, Ben, the final question is, we've been talking about grand juries. There was a grand jury that was disbanded in Kenai yesterday, which is contrary to a plain reading of the state constitution and, in fact, impinges on their statutory authority and rights as well. A local judge disbanded them and said they could not look into what is reportedly being said was some kind of corruption within the judiciary. And so, Ben, you said, you've been talking with the Attorney General. We are, and I think, and I agree with you, I think you've used the word, we're at a constitutional crisis because we've never had anything really come up like this before. We don't have a mechanism baked into place to be able to, to figure out how do we deal with this. I mean, if we took it, and I was just saying during the break, if we take this and say, well, that judge has got to go, well, how do we decide that? Well, that's got to go to another court. Well, if we're looking at actual judicial misconduct or judicial, some kind of problem in the judiciary that they wanted to investigate, are we going to get a true and fair hearing from a superior court or a Supreme Court? Or, this is a constitutional crisis. I think you're 100% right. So walk me through the potential mechanisms. Again, this just happened late yesterday, so today's the day that it's going to have to be dealt with. But walk me through the what you think is going to happen mechanically here today, and what we, where we go from here.
Thanks, Michael. And I don't know exactly what's going to happen. That's part of the excitement here, and the this is new. We're going to figure this out as we go. There are some options. The Department of Law has a section within it that's for public corruption, and I suspect that the Attorney General may involve them, and that would mean that they would do some sort of some level of an investigation, and if there's a law that's been broken or reason, they might issue an indictment that would then have to go to another grand jury to investigate and prefer charges, or maybe if there's just the law's been broken, the troopers investigate and make an arrest. If those things don't happen within the executive branch, then the legislative branch can bring impeachment charges if that rises to that level, right?
Right.
I'm arguing that maybe it does. So the next legislature would have to, or during special session, would have to offer impeachment charges against a judge, or there's a grounds for lack of retention in the next retention election for that particular judge. So those are three different processes that we currently have in place to be able to follow, and we just have to figure out which one of those is going to be the appropriate one here. And maybe there's something that I'm not seeing and unaware of right now.
This raises a bigger question, and I don't know if you want to steer into this territory with me, but I'm gonna jump in with both feet. I mean, Alaska has a fairly unique plan for the judiciary itself, how judges are chosen, or in our case, retained. And we operate under, I believe it's called the Missouri Plan. Is that correct? I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the Missouri Plan for pulling these, judges and selecting judges, and it's a retention form. Now, from what my understanding is that this was very popular back in the 40s and the 50s, but has since fallen out of favor. And in fact, I think we're the only state that still votes, in this case, not to elect judges or not to, do it on their merits, but basically we just vote to retain. And people have been saying for the last 5 or 6 years specifically that this is a kind of a problematic approach, that we need to change the way that our justices and our judges are chosen. Do you want to weigh in on that with your thoughts? Have you dug into this at all, or looked at what's going on?
So as far as making changes to the way we retain our judges or pick our judges, I haven't done any specific investigation into that yet. And even if this is the Missouri plan, I'm unaware of that. It's vaguely in my mind, it strikes something as true, but even if we did maintain a retention system, it kind of makes sense to me that a judge gets appointed for a time, and then the retention piece of it is that they aren't retained automatically unless the judge goes out and campaigns and there's enough support to retain them. In my mind, that would be a better retention system than what we have now, which is just that by default they get retained unless there's enough public outcry that says they don't get retained. That's a process that's ripe for corruption. If you're able to hide the problems, then they just continue. But if the judge wasn't retained automatically, unless they can convince people that they deserve another 10-year stint or another 5-year stint or whatever, then that would be preferable in my mind. Do we want to get to a place in the state of Alaska where we're electing our judges and there's one more person out there during an election cycle that's got signs out there and has got to have public meetings and run through the election process? Maybe. I mean, if that's the solution that we want to go for reining in some of this judges and their crazy rulings, something's got to change, because what's happening right now is not working.
Well, because we've seen, I think we've had one judge in, I think it was 15 years or something, who has not been voted for retention at this point. I mean, it really kind of hides it, because, would you like to retain this judge? Well, I'm not really paying attention and I haven't done it, and none of this stuff has been brought out into the public eye, so sure, I'll retain. I personally have been, the last 10 years, have been voting to retain no judges, because I just don't like the system at all, because I think it's fundamentally broken and flawed, because, as you said, if the thing is hidden in the dark and nobody really knows and they're just asking you if you should retain them, I don't think that we've gotten enough information to know whether or not we should retain them or not. And I too would say, even though I think that there are political aspects and problems where, you're turning some of the politics in on judges when you have to elect them, at least you'd have a better idea of where they stood and what their beliefs were and what the system said. I think at least it would be a step in the right direction. I think our judicial the system for choosing our judiciary is broken in this state, and it definitely needs to be addressed. And I know some people are talking about the con as a way to fix that.
Yeah, Michael, I'm like-minded. I believe that we do have a system that needs to be improved. I am open to suggestions and alternatives, and will do my due diligence and figure out what the right way forward is to make improvements. Can we get to it in this next legislature? Well, maybe. Depends on how people vote in the election, right?
Right.
Does the Constitutional Convention have to take it up? Well, they might. That might be where this is the best place to address it. So,
well, it's something I think we're going to have to get into here over the next year for sure on the program here to discuss fully, and maybe we'll get some experts on different legal systems and retention and election systems for judges, because, again, it's supposed to be a co-equal branch of government, but we've seen what a pivotal role the courts have played in policy in the state of Alaska. Whether it was the Wielechowski decision, whether it was the PCE thing, whether it was, dedicated versus designated. There's a lot of things in there that the judiciary has a tremendous amount of power on, and I think it's something that we have neglected to really focus in on over the last couple decades in this state, and I think it's something now that's worth the look for sure.
If I've got just a few seconds, Michael, I'd like to say that
you got 5 minutes here. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's some argument from some folks that say, the legislature and the governor just need to ignore what the judges say. The judiciary is the weaker branch. And so it doesn't really matter. Whatever the judge says we can just ignore it. Well, maybe that's true if you've got enough people within the legislature and a strong enough backbone of a governor that is willing to weather the backlash. But do we really want a system of government, a form of government where we're regularly ignoring what's happening in one branch?
Right.
Doesn't that highlight that there's something broken there if we're going to just ignore what the function?
I would agree totally. Yeah.
Right. So I don't want to get to a place where we're just, picking and choosing which cases we ignore and which we abide by. So, the judges in the past who have made financial decisions for the state, they say, no, the legislature has to spend money this way. Well, that's not the role of the judiciary. That's the role exclusively of the legislature.
Right.
We get to make those financial decisions, and it shouldn't be that the power of the judiciary encroaches on the power of the purse. That can't be. So we either have to make a decision at that point. Do we ignore what that judge said, or do we remove a judge who's usurping authority? Because it's a broken system at that point. The judge ought to know that if they're going to make a ruling that's directing the legislature how to spend money, that's an improper use of their authority. They don't get to make that call. That is the judiciary or the legislative branch's call.
Right.
So we need a system in place whereby that judge can be removed because they obviously don't understand their authority.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. I think that we need some kind of, and as Kevin points out, the only judge that has been voted not to be retained. It was a very high-profile case. It was an outrageous verdict and decision by the judge. There was a huge backlash, and it took a lot of work. But that was one judge in, I think it was 35 or 40 years that had not been voted to be retained in the system. So, there's got to be a better way to do this. We've got to look at this. And, maybe if there is some merit to what the grand jury was looking at, maybe we can root out some of the problems in there as well. But I'm very, very interested to see what takes place today, Ben, and to find out what happens. I'm assuming you're going to keep us on board here and keep us in the loop as to what's going on.
I will. I would also ask the public's patience that that I'm not going to let this down. I'm not going to forget about this. And we do need to work through things, which doesn't need to be, tried in public opinion. So we need some time to work through things here. I would just like to say that I suspect that investigatory grand juries haven't been happening in the state for a very long time.
Yeah.
I think that the last major investigation was during the Sheffield administration, and it may be decades that we have gone without prosecutors and judges allowing investigatory grand juries. And what does that mean for state government if the power of the grand jury to investigate the public welfare has been suspended for 30 years?
Right.
What does that mean? How deep does this rabbit hole go?
Exactly. I mean, what level of corruption has that allowed to grow if they have been not allowed to investigate in any branch of government? If they have not been allowed to investigate what the government doesn't, because these are all government employees, if they're not allowed to investigate what the government doesn't want to allow them to investigate, what is actually hidden under all that stuff? It's a spooky thought.
It is a valid question. There are grand jurors who have raised their voice from time to time that say, yes, we have been told by either the prosecutor or the judge that we can't investigate that. That is known. I can put names to those statements. I'm not going to do that publicly.
Right.
But that has happened over the past. It's not just recently over one particular case. It's over different types of cases over the last decade or so.
Right.
So anyway, we're going to stay on top of it. I will update you as best I can, at the appropriate times. I was conflicted as to whether I needed to bring this out to the public at this particular time. Is it going to serve our best interest to highlight it now, or should we allow the process to kind of take place? And I woke up this morning and I said, you know what? Transparency means the public needs to know what's happening.
Right.
And they need to know sooner rather than later. And that gives them maximum ability to hold their government accountable.
No, I would agree.
And so that's why I decided to come on today. My intention is also to not get so into the weeds here that we damage our ability to prosecute or find a remedy.
Yep.
So, thanks for the opportunity, Michael.
Ben, thank you for coming on. Keep us in the loop. We appreciate it. And I think you're 100% right. We need to know this information, at least that it's happening, so that we don't have to have the details, but we need to know it's coming on. Ben Carpenter, our guest. Hold the line, Ben. Thank you so much, folks. We got more coming up. Phone lines are open. Up next, The Michael Duke Show.
Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay, final thoughts for Ben. We were running up against the hard break there, so just final thoughts. Anything else you want to leave us with, Ben, before we go? I mean, I appreciate you coming on, and I know there's always that conundrum of, do I let people know that it's going on? Is that endangering anything? I think we've been generic enough here that hopefully it's just gotten people's attention as to what's going on. But I think you're right. I think in the spirit of transparency, we need to know. We need to know what's going on.
Yeah, I don't have any much more to add than what we did. Maybe just one question, Michael, to change the subject briefly, the one that you really wanted to talk about today. If I was to buy a 1911, which brand would I go with?
Boy, that's a good question. There's really no such thing as a bad 1911. I have had over the course of years, I've had Springfield 1911s. I think that they're really nice. They are expensive. I've had not as expensive as like Kimbers. Kimbers are super nice. I mean, they are the Rolls Royce of 1911s. But I've also had a $300 Rock Island Armory 1911 that worked just fine. So, I mean, John Moses Browning was a genius, and that pistol is like the epitome of simplicity and reliability. So it's pretty hard to say if I was going to, if you got money that you were willing to burn and you want to make a good investment on something that's not going to lose its value for a long time, a Kimber, you can never go, can't go too far wrong on that. A Springfield, I think, is a good middle ground. I've got a couple Springfields and I like them a lot. And of course, if you can find an actual Colt on the aftermarket that's been taken care of, that's another good choice. But even if you just go the Rock Island Armory route, there's a few of those out there that I've shot over the years that have just been, really solid pistols. So, 1911 is not a bad. There's not a bad one out there as far as I think on that one.
Yeah, very good. I've always wanted to have one. It isn't in part of my collection now, and at some point in time, I would like to own one.
Yeah, depending on how big your hand is and how comfortable you are in it, you could go the Para Ordnance route too. Para Ordnance makes a 1911 that's a double stack, and which is it's one of my favorite guns. I have one of the original. They weren't even. I bought one when they weren't even making full guns. They were just making kits that you could put on. It was basically a frame or receiver that you could put on. You'd buy another pistol and make mishmash them into one pistol. And I really like that one as well. But now Para Ordnance has been making the double stacks for years. So a double stack 1911 is twice the fun, is what I'm saying right now. That's what you need to check out. But,
well, I don't have giant hands, so yeah. I probably just have average size hands. So I probably need to stay away from the large double stack 45s or Desert Eagles, that type of thing. I don't think I would find that comfortable.
Greg Collins says his SIG 1911s are by far out of the box better than his Kimber. So a SIG 1911 is not. Everybody's making 1911s now. So you choose your favorite brand, and you could probably go out and find them a 1911 in that brand. So
see, that's the challenge. There's too many options.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
Gotta make a decision.
Yeah, no, I mean it's just I have one of my favorites. The Springfield that I have is a combat commander, which is it's tiny. I mean, I got big hands, and I could basically lay the whole pistol across the front of my hand. And it is like the ultimate concealed carry little pistol. But Springfield makes a good one. They're all pretty good. Like I said, I don't think you'll find a bad one out there. From $300 to $1,500-$1,800, you can spend as much money as you want or as little as you want. So you can go check it out.
It's been a pleasure, Michael. Thanks for making time this morning.
All right,
it was an important conversation.
It was, and I'm looking forward to hearing what's going on, and I hope that you'll keep us in the loop on it. Thank you.
All right, have a good day.
All right, appreciate you calling in. Ben Carpenter, our guest here on the program. I suppose I should start the phones. I said join us on the phones and call in, and then I didn't set the phone lines up. Because I was busy doing my thing here.
Thanks for calling the call-in line of the Michael Duke Show.
Let me get this all squared away. We'll figure out who's going to be doing it here. Ben, come try some of mine. Rock Island also has a wide selection of calibers: 9, 45, 10 millimeter. It is a fantastic. It's such a fantastic design. The 1911 is just, something about it. It's just beautiful, man. It's beautiful. All right. We got one call on hold, and we're going to be joining them here in less than 30 seconds. I don't really have time to go figure out who it is, so we'll pick that up here in just a minute. But we'll take any calls that you want. We'll talk about anything for the last segment of the show this morning because we can. Oh, gotta go. All right, you ready to do it? Let's go. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Like and share this video. Like and follow the show page. Subscribe and ring the bell on YouTube. All right, welcome back to the program. Ben Carpenter actually got us in the mood during the break. He was asking me my opinion on 1911, so he kind of got me in the mood for a little bit of firearms action. So we'll open up the phone lines if there's anything you want to talk about today. I don't have enough time to really get into any of the things that I was going to get into over the firearms issues, but if you just want to talk guns, I'll be your Huckleberry. I'll be your Huckleberry. Let's go over here, see what you guys have to say. We start off with this caller at 433-3150, the Pivotel call-in line, powered by our friends at SatelliteWest.com. Good morning, caller. Who's this, and where are you calling from?
This is Carlene and
Hello, Carlene.
Hello. Interesting, your interview with Ben Carpenter, and he was even wondering if he should bring this subject up, the transparency, and then just decided this was the day. I felt like what happened at Uvalde, some people just wanted to stand back and see what transpired, but it just seemed like truth was coming out and was coming out and was coming out. But if you just stand back and watch, then it gives the other side time to create their own narrative. And in the law books at schools, like Forbes Law School or wherever, they have pages and pages on prosecutorial misconduct. And perhaps there's the same thing on misconduct judiciary. So that would be interesting to read up on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, there's plenty of history out there of misconduct amongst people who are supposed to be upholding and supporting the laws, whether that's prosecutorial, whether that's judicial, whether that's police and law enforcement. Public. We've seen it time and time again. They are not immune to the temptations of doing bad things. And it's really worrying to me that the second that somebody says, we're going to investigate your bunch, and somebody says, nope, you can't do that. I mean, that immediately to me is like a red flag on the play. We've seen this. I mean, we saw what happened with Ted Stevens. We've seen what's happened with, misconduct involving police officers across the country who are supposed to be protecting us, sometimes all the way up to the chiefs of police doing things that, that they talk out of one side of their mouth and they're doing something illegal on the other side. I mean, this stuff it's real and it needs to be investigated. And most importantly, the grand jury is our tool as citizens to keep the government in check. And when the government squawks and says, no, you can't do that, that is their mission. That is their purpose, Carlene.
And then they could also be investigated and come out squeaky clean. Wouldn't that be wonderful? But it just seems like the directions is pointing another direction.
Right. Well, what's the cop's favorite saying, Carlene? Hey, if you got nothing to hide, what's the problem? Why shouldn't we talk to you if you got nothing to hide? Same thing goes to those guys. If they've got nothing to hide, if you don't want, then why are you squawking? Why are you worried about it? If there's nothing to hide, nothing to see here, move along. There you go.
Interesting. Thank you, Michael.
Carlene, thank you for your call today. We appreciate it. That leaves all four lines open. If you would like to sound off this morning, we're down to the last 4 or 5 minutes here. We got time for probably one or two more calls if we're quick. 907-433-3150, 907-433-3150. Again, a reminder, I will not be here tomorrow or Monday. Monday is the holiday. I'm taking tomorrow off to make it a 4-day weekend for myself. And so if you tune in tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., you members of the 6 o'clock club, and don't hear me, don't send me messages, okay? I will be asleep. I will be asleep tomorrow morning. I can guarantee it. I will be sleeping in. So we will be off the air tomorrow and Monday, returning on Tuesday to the program to start things off fresh and full of vim and vigor. I think we'll have some analysis from Brad Keithley on the budget come Tuesday for sure. So we'll be talking about that as well. It should be fun. Oh, speaking of which, speaking of 6 o'clock club, I forgot to put up the post on the Facebook page that said I was closing out the order. So I will be doing that here in just a bit later this afternoon. So if you are interested in any of the swag that we have available, including the coffee mugs and the T-shirts and everything else supporting the show, if you go to the Facebook page at facebook.com/Michael Duke Show, and it's right there on that first link. If you go there and I haven't written that the ordering is closed, which I'm going to do later this morning, then you could still order a T-shirt or a mug or whatever. Just let me know what you want, and we'll get it squared away there. Again, facebook.com/Michael Duke Show. But I will be ordering the rest of that stuff today. Back to the phones we go. Good morning. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Robin from Fairbanks.
Hello, Robin. What's on your mind?
So I know this could be completely off topic, and I know this is one of the subjects that boils your blood, but how exactly did Alaska become so lax with their abortion laws? Like, I started looking up, obviously, after Roe versus Wade, and, like, Alaska was one of the first ones that legalized it before Roe versus Wade, and there's, like, no exceptions. Like, it could be 8 months and still get an abortion. How did Alaska end up like that?
Well, it was a decision by the judiciary based around our constitutional right to privacy. That's where the court decision came out from, was that Alaska has a very heavy and strong provision for a right to privacy in our state constitution, and that's what the justices and the judges used to justify that decision, to say it's none of our business, it's the people's business. They can do what they want at that point. And I don't know the exact year. I'll be honest with you. I would have to go back, Robin, and look at the actual law. But it has been around for a long time. But that's the cornerstone of the abortion right in the state of Alaska, is they're arguing that it falls under the right to privacy as provided by the state constitution. Maybe we can get deeper into that next week, Robin, to discuss it. Thank you for your call. One more call, I think, over here. Good morning. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
It's Terry calling from Kodiak.
Hello, Terry. What's on your mind? Quickly.
I noticed that in the NRA magazine there was a little spiel about you can't disarm a dog if somebody's attacking you and you have a dog for your weapon. You can't disarm that, and I thought that schools should look into military trained dogs wearing body armor to help protect the schools.
That's been discussed before on the program, and in fact, I've seen it's been part of a discussion in some of the different states as well, having a trained dog like that, like they use in combat situations. It might be a solution. I mean, you may be right, Terry. It may be a way to help out. It's an interesting. You can't disarm them. That's for sure. All right. Thank you for your call. Folks, we're out of time. I will see you on Tuesday. Have a fantastic 4th of July weekend. We'll see you then. All right, my friends. Thank you for being part of it today. Be kind. Love one another. Live well. That's all we can say. So make sure you have a great 4th of July weekend. Celebrate Independence Day in whatever way you see fit. The birth of the greatest nation on the face of the earth. Yes, I'm rubbing your nose into my vacation. It's one day, Brian. You're the boss. You take one day. You could do it. I'm the boss. I took 1 day. I made a decision, executive decision. Take that time off, Brian. You can do it. All right, folks. Gotta go. Thanks for coming in. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio.
We've shed our terrestrial radio skin, and now we are slimy lizard internet people. It's the Michael Duke Show.
Goodbye.